everybody, and welcome to the Rams Review podcast. As a newly promoted side, the odds were stacked somewhat against Derby in the championship relegation battle. And after a solid start, they at one point looked down and out. But the Rams don't do it the easy way. Under the transformational leadership of John Eustace, Derby racked up playoff form, the former midfielder digging them out of a hole to secure another year in the second tier. Which brings me to this podcast. Corey along with you today. Jack is also with me in Rams Review HQ. Jack, we're going to do our season review, and as is tradition on the podcast, we bring in BBC Radio Derby, and the guy who drew the short straw, but I'm just kidding because he's a friend of the podcast today. It's Dom Dietrich. Dom, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while since you've been on here, but welcome back.
Yeah, it's been an entire season, hasn't it? Since the last one. Now I'm happy to be back. Glad it ended on a nice note for us to look back on.
Yeah, and Dom, it was a bit hairy there from a period of time and whatever. And so we're going to get into some of the specifics and some of the things that you noted, covering all the games this season. And before we look a little bit ahead into the future, but sum up, Dom, the fact that Derby are in the championship, because me personally, I'm looking at this and thinking it's difficult to put it into words about how much this means. And yeah, it sounds a bit silly that we finished, we finished in the lower third of the table and we're not celebrating per se, but all in all, Dom, it can be seen as a successful season and probably the best outcome Derby could have hoped for.
Yeah, I think it was a successful season in terms of the plan of where they wanted to finish and where they wanted to place. I think there are a lot of issues that reared their head across the season, just the fundamentals from the club side of things and maybe the processes in which they've done things that haven't gone particularly to plan. But I think, look, the league finish, you can't argue with it. John Eustace has come in, he's rescued them. I think they can all breathe a huge sigh of relief. But it has been a strong end to the season, no doubt about it. But yeah, there was a lot to unpack. I'm sure we'll get into it across this episode of the pod. But I just think there will be plenty of lessons learned from this season. But crucially, Derby are a championship club. I think when you look at the big picture and you look at the investment talks that are ongoing at the moment, it makes Derby a much more attractive proposition. I think the fact that John Eustace can build from a championship side rather than have to go again in League One is huge, and it gives him such a positive platform to build from. So look, I didn't think relegation was an option this season at all, and fortunately Derby have gotten away with it to some respect with the end of season form, and they're in the championship, so they can go from there.
Yeah, and Jack, it is crucial that we stayed above that high watermark. I think we had talked about that throughout this season on the podcast. All basically 4 or 5 of us, and the regular guests and everything. It was a state of, and I think I said this at the beginning of the podcast, and I'm not patting myself on the back, but I thought to myself, this will be a successful season if we finish 4th bottom. And if you had said in August, we would finish 6th bottom or something like that, I would have snapped your hand off, because 4th bottom, I think, is where we wanted to be. I think we were always confident that there were 3 worse teams in the league than Derby. Ultimately, it proved that, but not for Derby's lack of trying, so to speak, in trying to do that. But, like Don pointed there, Jack, it's a hell of a lot easier to build, isn't it, from a championship base than having to go back to League One, because financials are different, investment levels are going to be different, investment interest is going to be different. And, this was kind of a non-negotiable kind of floor. We had to stay in the championship to grow it and kick on, isn't it? And for that plan that David Klaus keeps talking about, not officially, but, that kind of 5-year, kind of 5-6-year kind of rebuild.
100%. I mean, I go back to what I said 9 months ago, and what I wrote 9 months ago. I've just been looking back at my season preview piece that, I was talking about survival for stability, really. This is a Derby team who, it wasn't necessarily going to be pretty, but it was all about just avoiding the drop, 4th bottom, even if it came down to the final day as it did. This now is the platform to build from as a somewhat stable championship club, hopefully. That Derby can, with a manager who is up there with some of the best in the league, I think we can say in John Eustace, given his track record now, can hopefully kick on. But yeah, if they'd gone down on Saturday, then this would be an entirely different conversation. I think we'd probably have more concerns around management as well, given John Eustace I don't think he's managed in League One, or not for a prolonged period of time anyway.
Yeah, and it always evolves, Jack. As we go through the season, players evolve and personalities evolve, and we're going to get onto the move, which ultimately will correct for John Eustace later on in the season. But Dom, I want to come to you because early doors in the season, first couple months, it looked pretty good, to be honest. Kind of stands out to me is that 1-0 home win against Middlesbrough, where dare I say your guy Caden Jackson, who you picked as a preseason kind of thing because he had looked good in the early stages of the season, scored that tremendous winner from like midfield where he just ran down the thing. He didn't chip anybody, he just ran down the middle of the field. And that was kind of 3 points that we kind of stole away that we didn't think we would get. But the first couple of months went pretty well, didn't they, Dom? And from your perspective up in the commentary booth, having looked at it and everything, talk me through those first couple of months, what you guys were talking about, and then all of a sudden, what changed? So what changed in the form? What changed in the team to make the form kind of patchy and then eventually fall off a cliff?
Yeah, it's taken all of 5 minutes for you to remind me about that Caden Jackson chat, hasn't it? Yeah, look, I think start of the season, there's always that element of surprise, isn't there, when you come up from League One and you grow into a Championship season. You look at the way Derby came out of the blocks. I think you spoke about the Middlesbrough game there. I'll always look at the Bristol City game as probably the strongest performance early on in the season. That was backed up by the Cardiff City game. And you had that midfield three at the time of Ebu Adams, David Ozo and Kenzo Houdmine. And it looked like that was going to be a really tidy midfield, and it looked like Kenzo Houdmine was going to adjust to the level. It looked like David Ozo was going to be an integral part of Derby's season going forward. So when David Ozo picks up what led to be, let's be honest, a real season-ending injury with the reoccurrence he had, he came back for a couple of games, but he was ruled out really from there on out. I think that was a huge blow. I think losing Ryan Niambi early on as well was a real blow for Derby, and they never quite adapted. And I always think back to this season, I look at the strength and depth of the Derby squad, especially in that first half of the season. It just wasn't there. There weren't the options to change the game. And I think whether the club got complacent going into January, I don't know. They'll argue against that, but I think you just have to look at the timing of the business as to when they did it in January to maybe suggest they did. But I don't think anyone saw that run of form coming. The first game, really, that rang alarm bells, and I can remember it was the 2nd of November at Stoke City. It was that 2-1 defeat. And if you remember, Derby had gone to Millwall, they got that point. They got to Oxford, got that point. And it looked like things were getting better away from home. They then go to Stoke, and they play this. I would put it as the worst performance of the season. I think that's fair to say. It's definitely up there. And maybe if you take QPR out of it, and I think the alarm bells started ringing really from there in terms of the decline in performance. I remember interviewing Paul Warne after that game, and he wasn't particularly happy with some things that were being asked, and there was a bit of a back and forth. But I was talking to Eric Steele about this, and we were saying that, look, they need to be a lot better to stay in the division. And then they back that up with a win at Coventry. And then you're like, oh, okay, right, maybe they figured a few things out. And then that steady decline almost happens from there. And despite a good festive period, they just couldn't pick it back up. So I think at the start of the season, to answer your question, I think they came out of the blocks with that. A bit of a surprise factor, got a good couple of results, ran over a couple of teams, but the second the team started feeling it in the legs, started getting tired, injuries started to happen, that's when it all came down for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, Dom, in terms of once things started to go a little bit south, how does that change things for you? I mean, from my side, coming in to a couple of games in the back end of the season, as there's all the positivity, great. We're riding on coattails, right? But when it gets difficult, how do you balance that throughout that coverage? Because I know that would have been a big challenge as the results really fell off the cliff.
Yeah, but that's the job, isn't it? You can't just have the good times. And I think my role at work is to provide the balance. So my job is to play both sides of the debate. If it's going really well, maybe is this not working so well? But if it's going really badly and all you're getting is negatives and things like that, I've got to play devil's advocate and create a debate. Yeah, that was tough at the time because people demand something from you that you're not gonna. Well, I'm confident in how I operate. That I wasn't, willing to give. I think I pushed as hard as I could, but you're never going to please everyone. So look, I think it was challenging, but I think we nailed it really on air. When you look at the way everything transpired and the way events happened, I think we're lucky that we have some incredible summarisers. We have Malcolm Christie, who's been a real asset this season. Eric Steele's been brilliant as always. Darren Robinson, always so critical and honest in his approach and doesn't just toe the party line. I think he's been fantastic. But yeah, it's a challenge, but you've got to kind of relish it a little bit, because that's when people are engaging and they're coming to us for answers on things. So I think it wasn't a fun time. That might not be the right word, but it was a rewarding time in terms of the work side of things.
Yeah, I mean, apologies, listeners. I'm going straight in with what can I learn here? What can I pick up rather than purely entertainment? But no, I think it's interesting just in terms of that contrast to the different periods of the season. I mean, January was obviously a really difficult month for Derby on the pitch, but also off the pitch with transfers and kind of things falling through towards the end. As things went south, do you think things could have been different had deals got over the line at that point?
Yes. Oh, different with Paul Warne, do you mean?
Well, generally, Paul Warne or otherwise.
I think the two transfer windows don't think it covered Derby in a lot of glory this season. I'm sure if Paul Warne was to speak honestly, he might suggest that he might not have had the tools he felt he needed. But I think when you see the work of John Eustace, it's really hard to argue with that. You've gone from, I guess, a coaching staff that are looking at this team as a League One team with the famous quote, and I'm sure Paul regrets saying it, but with a sprinkle of sugar on top, to then a team with John Eustace where he is bringing them back and he's re-energising them and making them go again. So I think things could have been different. Yeah, I think if Paul Ward had got the big striker he asked for his entire reign before a couple of weeks before he was sacked, I think that would have helped. Maybe some cover in that striker position, a midfielder. Who knows? But that's what football's great for, isn't it? We all have our opinions. We all look at things, and I think whilst it could have been different, I think you've just got to go off what happened. And John Eustace proved what was possible with this group of players. Although we did have a couple of new toys to play with Matt Clark, Harrison Armstrong, who Paul Ward didn't play, Sondre Langas, and so on. So, yeah, whether or not things would have been different if Paul Ward had got a few more of his players, I'm not too sure. But look, John Eustace proved that it was possible.
Indeed.
So Dom, you always go back and you said that you like to play devil's advocate and everything like that. And I'm not gonna push you or anything like that because you're relaxing in the sun. And the January period that you talk about, right? From Boxing Day, I think it was to February, where Derby picked up no points. Basically, back of the packet math, it's essentially what, a third of the season, give or take, right? That you went without some points, probably a little bit longer. Between a third and a quarter of the season without any points. I mean, what was the defining factor in that? And then how difficult was it for you witnessing it every week, seeing the angst among the supporters grow, seeing the confidence of the group kind of slip, see, the changes in Paul and his demeanor as, the team is continuing to lose? How difficult is that for you to balance? And then what do you put that kind of down to? Because we expected Derby to struggle, but after Boxing Day, the bottom just fell out. And it was just to the point where it was like, are we ever going to win again? Because no points for 12 games or something, 13 games is a very, very long time. So what were your thoughts on that period? And do you put it down to injuries? Do you put it down to lack of confidence? Was it just a snowballing effect, or was it just a perfect storm of a whole bunch of different factors?
I just think I think the message wore thin. I just think Paul Paul Warne in his time and in his message maybe had just diluted over a long period of time. I think tactically they needed to be more astute and set up differently in different games. I think John Eustace has showed that. I think a number of the players have spoken afterwards since Paul Warne's gone and John Eustace has come in about the change in training, about the change in the focus on them rather than the opposition. I just think it snowballed a little bit, and I imagine when you're a player and you've had the same head coach for some time and you're getting told the same thing and you've heard the same team talk and the same messaging, maybe that just becomes a bit redundant in your mind. It doesn't get you going. You need a fresh voice, and we know all too well in football that a new man can walk in and do a job and lift a group of players. So I just think once those results started to happen, and I'm not sure, look, it's no coincidence that after that Leeds game, there was absolutely nothing to go off for Paul Warne. And I'm sure he would regret saying what he did after that game, because I'm not sure that would lift the players at all. You then go to Hillsborough, you lose 4-2. I mean, it wasn't the best performance. Remember that Bristol City game that followed that? Unbelievably flat at Ashton Gate, nothing to really report off. Then the cup exit, and then you look at the home games, the back-to-back ones without scoring, Watford and Sunderland. So it was the perfect storm, kind of against Paul Warne, but he had to find a way, and he couldn't, and that became clear in the end. I guess it was a tough run of fixtures, and injuries were a concern, but I guess he had just got everything he could out of the squad.
And Dom, one of the things that kind of came up for me, Jack, I'm gonna discuss this point with you, is that interview, Dom, that you did with Matt Clark after he'd come in, and you said, what was kind of the plan today? And Matt Clark's kind of like, I don't really know what this plan thing you speak of is, but like I went out there and kicked the football around. I almost said soccer ball there. Whew, that was almost the end of my podcasting career. And that was kind of a damning kind of thing, because people sat there and said, didn't they, Jack? They were kind of like, well, this lad's just come in, and what's he been working on all week? Because there is no plan. And I think that was kind of the beginning of the end, where I think that, we always try to be very fair to managers. It's a very tough job. We always try to do, always try to be fair and whatnot, not hide criticism, but try to be fair. But that was kind of the point, Jack, wasn't it? The turning point where it was like, look, I think that this, he has rode as long as he can here. I think it's time to get someone in the hot seat.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the way I would put it, as I try and kind of toe the line and try and be somewhat diplomatic about it, trying to build a relationship with the club, is that once the fans are seemingly going a majority against the manager, it's untenable, right? That's the point where you think, yeah, beginning of the end, this is a ticking time bomb. And that kind of accelerated that process, I think. For that to be his first game and for him to be the one to go and speak to the media after another defeat, after the run had continued that he'd not really been a part of, was definitely something. But I think it's something that was, Paul Warne did seem to be kind of worn out by just the consistent struggles. I mean, I go back to that Bristol City game that Don mentioned, and I remember him putting a very dejected figure on Rams TV, talking after the game about the injuries and saying, look, I know it's an excuse, but we've got all these injuries. And this came back to me the other week. It was after the Luton defeat. I was sat in Eustace's press conference, and he's saying, by contrast, look, that's an excuse. I'm not going to use it. We've got to get on with it. And I wonder whether that, even after that was the fourth game without a win, I wonder whether that at that point is the difference when you have a fresh person, a fresh perspective in there who has kind of come in with less expectation in the short term as well, having that bit more energy with them to keep that positive mindset. Ironically, towards the end, did Paul Warne maybe himself look a little bit gassed out? That was kind of the figure he started to cut at times, certainly. But yeah, I think it's it's a shame. I still think it's a shame. He seems like a really, really nice guy, to be honest. I mean, Dom will know. You work with him. But yeah, it's just, it was that did feel like another moment, I'd say. Leeds away, I'd say that Bristol City game, and then that Matt Clark interview were kind of the moments you kind of thought, yeah, this is the trajectory now. And I'd say, yeah, that was kind of that.
And as you say there, Jack, it was a real mindset shift, if I could speak properly. As I'm trying to speak proper English to the BBC. It was a mindset shift, wasn't it? Because, as you said, Eustace didn't use the injuries as an excuse when he came in. He kind of flipped the mentality, and you wrote about it several times, and that kind of became the quote was, "We're fighters, not victims." And I'm going to talk to Dom a little bit about that mindset shift in a minute. But I think what kind of struck out to me, Jack, is once they appointed John Eustace, the thing that really made me upset, if I may, is, and I put a picture out about this on the Twitter account, was it was at QPR away. And Derby were having a very insipid performance and everything like that. And Eustace had a pencil and he was erasing stuff on his thing. And I just thought, you don't see people with pencils on the touchline. They use pens or iPads or something, but he had a pencil with an eraser and he was erasing something. And I put it out like, wonder what John Eustace is erasing. And the comments were fun to watch. But I think the thing that stood out to me that was disappointing was the fact that he had played QPR, 7 days before with Blackburn or 10 days before with Blackburn, and then went to QPR and couldn't work them out. And I realized it was a kind of different thing. And I wasn't really on board the train so much in that early doors because Dom, as he came in, Derby didn't get that new manager bounce straight away, didn't they? It was a little bit delayed. So what was your perceptions, from the people that you spoke to and from what you were witnessing, where John Eustace comes in, he's expected to bring this new manager bounce, but it took 3 games for it to come over a period of time. And I think that those 3 performances weren't great. And ultimately, then we're going to talk about the good times towards the end of the year. What were your initial impressions over those first 3 games where Derby were kind of like, eh? Did you say, hey, we're building something here, we can see green shoots of stuff growing? Or was it more of like, how much is this really going to change stuff?
Well, I think you have to absolutely discount the Queen's Park Rangers game. Just to give you an insight into, what was it, the day before or the day of the game? I'm trying to remember when we did the press conference. It was an absolute circus at Moor Farm. He had national press. He had to do so many different interviews. He had all the press there just to paint a picture as well. Usually it's me and Lee Curtis at these press conferences with either BBC's Midlands Today and maybe one other. But this time there was probably about 8 different journalists wanting to ask questions, and he walks in and he's suddenly thrust under the spotlight of, why'd you leave a playoff team to join a relegation threatened team? And he's having to answer all these questions. About half an hour after that press conference, they get on the coach to leave. So he's met the players. He's barely been able to do anything tactically with them. They get to the ground, and we were sat doing the sports scene from 6 o'clock building up to the game, and we were watching Matt Gardner, Keith Downing, and it was actually Matt Hamshaw as well at the time. Matt Hamshaw was getting walked through their warm-up and how they do it. And it was almost like watching someone looking to gain experience, like get shown how to do a job, because it was completely new. The players then come out, and it was awful because they just didn't know what the warm-up was. So that's how fresh it was. They didn't even know their routine before the game. So I think he probably shouldn't have taken charge of that. But then I think, and he touched on this in his final interview of the season last Saturday, he will have learned so much from that night at QPR, because that was the lowest of the low, the biggest defeat of the season. And he will have known who he can trust. He will have learned who can handle the pressure. He will have learned all sorts. And remember, he went in with a 4-2-3-1 in that game. For the first 10 minutes or so, they actually looked like they'd got something across to them because they were pressing in a completely different way. But then he switches, and that shows him that this team is probably going to be better in a 5. And then you start to see those little shoots. And I think Middlesbrough was the game for me where I thought, right, okay, he's clearly getting something across to these players. And I think that's where they brought a lot of optimism from. Kane Jackson makes the mistake, Middlesbrough win. But the structure, if you go back to that game, it was there. And they had it goalless. It was pretty uneventful. It looked like Derby were going to get a point. And then they go on to the Blackburn game, and the rest is history. So I think, yeah, the structure really became apparent against Middlesbrough. I think QPR taught him a lot of things about the side. And then, obviously, he goes on to do what he does and keeps Derby up.
Yeah, you see, Dom, that's why you're in the press box commentating, and I'm watching it on telly and doing a podcast. So yeah, see, that's really important. That's really important. Insight behind the scenes on how different things can progress. Um, because if players don't know how to do their warm-ups right, sometimes there are creatures of habit, like the sights and the smells that you're supposed to have in your time hacks, and when things get changed, you get kind of messed around a little bit as well. But then, Jack, it ultimately did prove to be probably the master stroke of the season. We're going to talk to Dom about in a minute about some of the top performers in his mind, and some people maybe who disappointed him or whatever. But ultimately, Jack, it proved to be a master stroke, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dom's bang on with that structure at Middlesbrough, going to that back three properly. That was probably the first game where you saw those green shoots. I go back to the kind of tactical question that I'm still dining out on, that I got to ask John Eustace after Coventry, which he's talking about Ebo Adams' change of role, and I was looking back at highlights from various games and various press conferences for the piece I wrote up over the weekend. And it was then you could see it, and then Blackburn, fast start, and away we go. That was suddenly the proper start to the Eustace era. It taken a little bit of adapting. What's a new manager bounce was the sort of thing that people might have been thinking. But actually, once it got going, Derby were away. And, he's shown himself, I think, to be a really shrewd tactical operator. And it's interesting as well to look back to the opening night of the season at Blackburn against John Eustace, and some of the trends we saw that night, some of the differences between the sides. Again, having looked back at that game for this piece, you started to see with Derby where they were pouncing in moments to get goals, and turning tides when the opposition was starting to have chances, but maybe not put them away, as Derby did on a few occasions on that opening night. Obviously, they got the 2 goals later on, but yeah, it is. I think that was the moment that we really started to see it. The green shoots were at Middlesbrough. There was a reason that Caden Jackson was so dotted, lying on the floor with his shirt over his head, right? And that was because they believed they'd done well that day. So yeah, it's been a really interesting one. But I think then that run that came together, that's ultimately, I think we'd all agree, that's ultimately what got Derby out of the mess, to go from 7 points adrift to outside of the bottom 3 in 4 games was quite something, really.
Dom, who impressed you most this season? Obviously, Ebu Adams swept up the Player of the Year awards. I was a big fan of Jacob Zetterstrom as well. I thought he was immense for Derby in his first season with things. I thought that those two were probably the outstanding players. A mention as well to Sandra Langas, who played for a good portion of his time at Derby, basically on one knee. Who else kind of stood out for you this season for Derby?
I think Kane Wilson was the one that impressed me most. I had doubts at the start of the season whether he'd be able to get up to the level of Championship football. Of course, he had a little go with Bristol City before, and they didn't see him fit for purpose. But I just think he's grown throughout the season, throughout the tough times as well. He's had his injury setbacks. He's had to compete with Niambi as well. But I think he's the one player for Derby that you could look at, give him the ball, and he'd take them up the pitch. And Harrison Armstrong started to do that when he came into the team as well. But I just think he was fantastic. I think he's brave. I think he is a player that is improving. And I just think he's a very good bloke as well. He seems like a really nice guy off the pitch. I love interviewing him. He's always so honest, and he cares deeply about the football club. But yeah, I think his performances have really impressed me. I'm not quite sure how he does it. And I'm never sure whether he knows how he does it sometimes when he's skipping past people, because it looks like he's just heading into a crowd of players and just wriggling his way out of it. But it works for him, and his delivery's quite good as well at the moment. So yeah, Kane Wilson for me is the one that's impressed me most. I think we shouldn't be surprised at this point. Craig Forsyth is obviously the one that stepped up in the second half of the season as well. But yeah, I would agree with you on Sondre Langas as well, playing on one knee. He's been fantastic.
So, Dom, now that the dust is settled on the season and Derby are maintaining their championship status, I know that we kind of have glossed over large swaths of the season, but I think we've kind of hit the high points and kind of the gist of where things are going. There's the exciting part of becoming closed season champions, my favorite part of the year. Get the t-shirts printed, right? Closed season champs. They used to have that for the Washington football team, the Commanders, for years, off-season champs with the year. It was hilarious. So, Dom, I think the first big thing that we're all kind of not on tenterhooks about, but are excited to see is the retain list. I know that by law, the EFL have to put it, clubs in the EFL have to put it out after such a certain time. Is there anything that you can tell us or anything that you're hearing about when we can potentially expect that retain list to come out?
I'd imagine it to be in the next few days or so. To be honest, it depends. A lot of people just think like there's a date that the club plan to do it on and it happens. But the reality is there could be one player in those conversations that is taking a particularly longer time. I think if you remember last season, Conor Harahan's situation was ongoing as to what they were going to do with him and trying to work out a way for him to get a move out and so on. And I think he joined Barnsley on the same day, didn't he? I might be right in saying that. Don't fact check me on that. But yeah, so these things can rumble on, basically. I know meetings were had on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday with the recruitment team, with John Eustace and the senior management as well. So that's all taken place. But I imagine it will just be contractual, whether it happens today, tomorrow or Sunday at the time of recording. Will depend on just those final conversations. But once they happen, yeah, it'll be out almost immediately.
And Dom, not to hang you out to dry or anything like this, or to ruin your middle of the road nature. What are you expecting anything in terms of the retain list? Is there anybody that you're expecting not to be at Derby next season? Like Craig Forsyth, when he came off with 5 minutes to go, is that kind of his swan song in a Derby shirt, or is kind of all options from what you're hearing on the table right now with the club?
I'd be surprised not to see Craig Forsyth in the retain list, based on what John Eustace said to me after the game. He said he'd absolutely give him another year. I think the obvious ones to look at would probably be a Tom Barkes and so on, a Tyrese Forner, and whether they're going to be at the club. I'd be surprised
Joe
if they
Ward
were.
As well, I think, is one of those.
I think, has Joe Ward got another year?
He might do, but I mean, he might be made available for transfer. I'm not sure.
Have I got that wrong? Yeah, so there's a couple on there that are obviously going to be really interesting decisions looking at going forward. But yeah, I think that there are a couple of obvious ones that might be on there. I think Matt Clark's going to be the big story of it for me. I think you look at his deal, obviously he came in initially until the end of the season. Again, another player, I'd be surprised if he wasn't a Derby County player. Then you look at, Sonny Bradley, Eric Peters, Kemal Roof, Rohan Luthra, Jeff Hendrick, and the other ones, whether they're going to stick around, I'd be interested to see. I think some of the senior players that came in towards the end of the season, I'm not sure whether they'll be ready for next season as well, or whether they were just purely circumstantial. But again, wait and see. It's never as straightforward as you think it's going to be with released and retained. I always remember that. I thought last season James Collins might be released. He stayed on. I did think Conor Harahan was going to stay. I didn't think they could work away for him out of the club there, and they did. So, look, whatever I say, it'll probably be completely different. But yeah, I would be surprised if Craig Forsyth, Matt Clark, Liam Thompson weren't on the retain list.
And Dom, is there anything you can tell us about Nat Phillips' future? Obviously, he had a pretty good end to the season with Derby and was kind of paramount when they switched that back three when Eustace came in to stay. Obviously, he's being released from Liverpool. His contract's kind of up. I would assume that he's on pretty big wages, being the fact that he did play in the Champions League against Ibrahimovic for Liverpool. Coming to Derby might be an attractive proposition to have a home. He's kind of bounced around on loans in certain years. But again, it all comes down to numbers. Is there anything that you're hearing that deal could be done, or is Nat Phillips was like, thank you for your service. You've done great. We'd love to keep you, but unfortunately, you're going to have to go play somewhere else because we can't afford you.
I don't know the ins and outs of it really, but I imagine, well, from what I gather, Derby are interested in Nat Phillips. But then you come down to the decision down to the player, isn't it? And I wouldn't want to assume anything from Nat Phillips' side. But as you say, wages come into it. From what I gather, when Nat Phillips came into Derby got a pretty good deal on him with regards to wage contribution and so on. So I guess there's a point where Nat Phillips has to decide what he wants, whether he's willing to take a wage cut to play more football than he's played ever before. I think you can see the bond he's created with the club, but whether there'll be other offers from elsewhere, that'll be a question too. But yeah, I think given his performances, Derby will absolutely give it a go. But then we've had the conversation on air. What do you do with the centre halves? You've got Curtis Nelson returning. If Craig Forsyth's retained, Matt Clark's on Trilangas as well. If he wants to play a 4, John Eustace, and we're all assuming that, given his history with it, who fits in where. So maybe if you pick Matt Clark, you don't take Nat Phillips, or vice versa. I don't know.
Yeah, because you forget about Curtis Nelson, who was so solid for us before he got that devastating knee injury, and he'll be back, I would assume, sometime in the fall, Christmas time, somewhere around there. And where does he kind of fit into that puzzle? And because John Eustace might not have had a chance to look at him on the pitch yet. Dom, we talked a little bit about, and we know that this has been kind of not well reported, but we've read some reports on the investment that David Klaus is seeking for the football club. I think he's made no secret of the fact that he wants some investment. And like we spoke about earlier, now that they're in the championship, it should be a little bit easier to be able to get investors in. And again, not trying to give anything away or whatnot, just trying to get a little bit of an update. There's no anticipated, I wouldn't assume there's is there any anticipated timeline for this happening? Or is it just kind of the old, very vague talks are ongoing? We'll report when there's something to report from the club.
From what I gather, there are a very select few people that know what's happening, essentially. So it's being kept very close knit, as it should be. Normally, when you hear stuff about a takeover, it doesn't, as history would suggest, it doesn't bode well, especially with Derby County. So I think the quieter they do it, probably the better. I think this summer gives David Klaus an opportunity to push on with that front. I'm sure whoever, if it was a very interested party, if they were watching on, they would have waited to see whether Derby were League One or Championship. And then come to evaluation, I imagine. But yeah, the latest we know is that there are interested parties. There were a few, from what I believe, that progressed beyond just being an interested party in those intermediate stages. But other than that, yeah, there's nothing fresh there. It's very vague at the moment, and I'm sure it'll come out soon. I think, for the benefit of the club, I think going into this summer window, it's a strange one, because if you spend your summer window on David Klaus's budget, then suddenly towards the end, obviously they'll have pretty concrete evidence to suggest that it's going to happen or not internally. So whether this is the case, but you don't want to spend the summer budget working towards what David Klaus has got, and then suddenly realise towards the last week, oh, actually, there's a bit more now. So I'm sure whatever plans are in place, that will all be accounted for.
Yeah, fair enough, Dom. And I think it is better that it's done out of the public eye, because last time we did a takeover very publicly, I don't think it worked out very. I mean, it ultimately worked out okay because we got David Klaus, but there was some times there where it wasn't so great. So yeah, hopefully it rolls on and whatever, and it's a lot easier for the club to negotiate from a championship position, and a lot more interest is going to come when you're in the championship, because again, you're 46 games away from the Premier League. And I think, Dom, that's an important thing to note, that the sooner you get this done, the sooner that you can plan out your transfer window or multiple transfer windows. Because of the Club World Cup, we might have 2 transfer windows. How exciting would that be? Incredibly exciting. Thank you, FIFA. But you want to make sure that you can plan and you can have targets, and you don't have multiple lists in multiple different areas, and going under the couch cushions or thinking you have budgets when you don't, or having more budget than what you do, than what you think you do. So it's important, imperative to kind of get that done and get that done quietly and hopefully swiftly, so that we can make sure that we don't go through this again next season, because there were times where it was a bit stressful. Dom, I want to ask you this because Jack a couple of years ago did a podcast on a ferry coming from Shetland, because that is how dedicated this lad is to his profession. He was on a ferry, weren't you, Jack, from Shetland going back to Scotland. I know Shetland's in Scotland, but you were crossing the North Sea, I believe.
Yeah, North Sea.
Right. And we were talking to Lee Curtis about this, and Lee talked about times where he's climbed over fences at Lincoln. I think one time he got locked in the stadium. So Dom, I know a couple of years ago that because of poor planning from Ed Dawes, you guys ran out of gas. Sorry, petrol, going to Peterborough. Any kind of crazy stories this year from when either Paul Warren got sacked, or any kind of stories or funny bits from different stadiums, or anything that was kind of will live with you this season that we didn't get to see or hear in your review?
Yeah, I mean, the A14's always been an interesting road for, as you mentioned, running out of petrol. By the way, Ed will tell you that was absolutely the car's fault. I think it was Ed's.
I don't think you can blame the car. I think the machines are as smart as the people working them, but that's okay.
It was a quiet petrol gauge, but no doubt it was on. But yeah, the A14 has become synonymous now, because this season, obviously, the day Paul Warren was sacked, we were talking about it earlier. We're driving along the A14, me, Eric, and Ed, so the same three that ran out of petrol on that same road. We're driving past the same spot. We're laughing about the fact that obviously what had been and gone and what had happened that day going to Peterborough as we head down to Norwich. And suddenly the buzz comes on my phone, and I like the fact that a lot of people thought on that day I would have known probably before people. I genuinely had no idea, and I'm happy to admit that I had no idea that he was about to be sacked. Obviously, with the run of form, there was a feeling that it could be, if not this week, next week, or normally these things happen on Monday or after the game. But the Friday morning was a really bizarre time to sack someone. So I got that message pinged into me, and it said, Paul Warren's been sacked, and we're sat on the A14. So I just essentially shout and go, right, we need to pull over. And essentially my head just buries into my phone from that point. Luckily, Ed always drives, so I was able just to crack on and get some things done, sending messages to various people involved in it, trying to figure out what on earth's gone on. Meanwhile, dialing into BBC Radio Derby in a moving car to try and report on this story and to try and get other people to talk about this story as well. So I've got Eric Steele behind me in the car, and this is a guy that has been part of Champions League winning teams with Manchester United. He's worked with Sir Alex Ferguson. He's done tours in pre-season across Asia and been treated like royalty. He has every medal you can think of. And I've got Eric Steele in the back of this car, Toyota Yaris, just shoving a microphone in his face saying, we need to talk about Paul Warren, and we're live on the radio. So yeah, that day was definitely the day I won't forget, because that, honestly, I think, and I don't want it to sound like I'm saying it was a long day, because I appreciate this job. A lot of people would want to do it. But that was a very, very long day. It went from whenever the news came, I can't even remember, all the way through to about 9-10 o'clock, talking to people on the phone, trying to figure out what's happening, what's going on next, and just trying to get my head around the story. And then suddenly we're doing a 2-hour sports scene special, emergency talking from our hotel room. Yeah, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant day. It was one of my favourites. With respect to, obviously, I'm sympathetic to a man losing his job, but in terms of a story, as a journalist, you want these days, in a sick and twisted way, they're the most enjoyable. But broadcasting live on the A14, having previously ran down it for petrol and ran back down it, was definitely a highlight. And I think Eric Steele saw a very different side to me that day, because it was just time to lock in and absolutely get to work. So yeah, there was a lot of shouting at my phone, a lot of shouting at the signal. And thankfully, we got everything out, and I think people appreciated it.
Yeah, those are
You know
those are
what, John?
go on, Jack.
I can tell you exactly when the announcement came because I was sat in a lecture first week back after Christmas. We didn't go back till February. I had to come out then, which was typical. It was bang on 2 o'clock on the Friday afternoon that the public announcement came out. Did you? So were you literally hearing it as the club were putting that sort of statement out? Did you have kind of 5 minutes notice, hours notice?
I
What's the?
I think we probably got about a minute's notice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah, you usually I would probably know if something was going to happen. I would know if a sign is going to happen, um, and you kind of wait and go at the same time. But I think with something like that, where it was so immediate, and I think it was a bit of a surprise to everyone internally, maybe at the club as well. Yeah, it just happened.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, it did. That day felt completely out of the blue. I have to say, football-related class in Derby derailed that lecture as well as you could as you can imagine. But no, it is.
I bet.
But those are the days you want, as you say, as a journalist, right? Where you have a breaking story, you've got that adrenaline and that kind of enterprise. I mean, it's you're in at the deep end, and you've got to make do with what you've got. I mean, I have similar at Shrovetide recently, a couple of months back. I mean, that's chaos.
Wow.
I don't know how I survived that. To be fair, but but yeah, it is. I think those stories, those are the days that you'll look back on from this season. I'd say Eustace coming in was a similar milestone in a different sense. Again, how quickly that turned around. As I said earlier, watching that first press conference back, even it's remarkable how different that feels now.
Well, that was quite interesting actually. The night before, and the night before, what game was it? I don't remember what game. It was the game. Where are we? What game will it have been?
Before he came in.
Yeah, Oxford United at
Oxford,
home. Yeah, so I'm sat at Pride Park, and I get a message probably at about 6 o'clock to say that things are looking towards getting done now, and then we're kind of reporting on that slowly but surely. And I don't remember a single thing about that game. To be honest, I'm quite happy because looking back, goalless draw, it was a dull affair. But I was staring at my phone that entire game, staring at my laptop, messaging, trying to get the latest. And unfortunately, we actually went first with it that night that John Eustace was turning up to the game and that the deal was done. I remember looking towards Ed because Ed's mid-commentary at this point. And quite often I'll mouth things to Ed about, look, say this or say that if something's coming into us and something's happening. And I can't remember what I did. I think I typed it out on my phone and just held it up to him. And then I think he was struggling to read it and then basically just said, Dom, what's happened? And we went with it there. But that was really exciting because it was moving. And that kind of continued. That whole story was brilliant, to be honest, because I think it was such a coincidence that Eustace, his final game for Blackburn was the Wolves FA Cup game on the Sunday. So it kind of rolled on from Saturday. I was playing Sunday League football for my local team, Hilton SC, and I asked if I could be the line, or what did I do? I asked if I could miss the first half because I wanted to be on my phone just in case something happened. So I ended up being asked to run the line, and I'm holding my phone whilst I'm running the line, just reporting on like updates from what is happening with John Eustace, and the fact that the club had reached out to talk to him officially. That came through whilst I was running the line, and I went on for like the last half an hour, and all I was thinking was just what is going on, what is going on. Got back, obviously Blackburn lost that game, and then it was just sitting and waiting for Eustace's press conference about the approach and what he said, and it just kept going. So it was a really fun week. It was busy, but it was fun.
Yeah, and I will say now, and I'm going to say, if you put this up, Corey, I'll send you the link. If I put it up, I'll put it in myself. It's such a good story that I've framed a whole feature around it for the website with Eustace's final 14 games of the season, and John Eustace, which, if people want something to read, a bit of weekend reading or whatever, yeah, that is out there. There we go. Shameless plug out of the way. But,
I'll get to it.
Yeah, no. Well, no, because then I'll just embarrass myself in front of professionals. Great, but no, it's Yeah, I mean, it was. It's mad. I was actually at Moor Farm that Sunday as that was happening, doing the women's under 21 stuff. And again, even whilst that game's going on, I'm glued to Blackburn coverage at the Derby training ground. It's nuts. It was, but I think those sorts of moments define the season. And I would hope with John Eustace now, that's something we look back on coming out of next year, year after, wherever, and look at where the club's got to and go masterstroke, because there's been so much questioning around the timing. I think we can now all say, do you know what? Derby got that right. They waited and they got their man, and look at what he's done.
And
yeah, go on. Yeah.
No, please finish. What were you going to say?
I think in terms of the timing, it's an interesting one. I do think it was I still stand by the fact that it was a poor time to appoint someone. Granted, that they might have not known he was available, but I do think waiting until the end of the transfer window to then go forward and appoint and sack a manager isn't the best. But whether Aaron Cashin's money was the decisive point in all of that, who knows? But to come out the day before you're selling Aaron Cashin saying he's categorically not up for sale, or the week before saying he's categorically not up for sale, then having the head coach come out and forewarn, justify a transfer window that he didn't really get anything he wanted other than Solverson, really. His best player's been sold in Aaron Cashin, and then sack him. I still think that could have been handled a lot better.
Yeah, that's fair, because that press conference, just from afar, I imagine the atmosphere in there must have been really bizarre at that point, because you could just sense it even from little clips. And I mean, well, let's face it, if nothing else, timing-wise, they should have done it when you weren't on the A14 and I wasn't in lecture.
There you go. Then we'd all be happy. But it wouldn't be anywhere near as fun.
Yeah, Jack, it's a good point, because I think that there are windows in order to sack managers, right? Obviously, you can wait too long, you can do it a little too early, and I think that Derby maybe waited a couple of weeks a little too late in order to bring somebody in. But again, Dom, with a lot of moving chess pieces and things like that, you never know who's available, and if you can go out and get your guy, you got to get him when you can get him. Dom, one other thing I'm going to ask you before we let you go is, you get fed when you come to Pride Park. What was the best spread that Derby put on this season? And then which stadium that you went to this year had the best food overall? But what was the best food that they had at Pride Park? And then what was the best food at an opposition stadium?
I hate talking about this sometimes because it just sounds like I realise how lucky we are to go to the game for free, and the fact that we get luxury.
This is why I ask you these tough questions.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like
we can preface it by saying Dom is not being bougie. He is just rating food honestly and fairly based on his tastes.
I even sit on the fence for these questions. Derby, sausage and mash is always a treat at Derby, I have to say. And the breakfast cobs with the 12:30 kickoffs, whilst they're a pain, that's always a very big highlight. But away from home, there are clear winners. I think Middlesbrough was leading the way for quite some time. They had a pretty top standard lasagna. And then the final day at Hull City blew everyone out of the water. There was actually a menu, which you never get. And it was like street food. So it was they put far too much resource into feeding the press. We don't deserve that one bit. But yeah, there was all sorts there. So it was like burrito bowls. There was your standard mushy peas, gravy, and chips, which was unbelievable. A choice of desserts as well that were very impressive. So yeah, we didn't deserve it at all. And I felt incredibly guilty eating it. But yeah, Hull City won by a country mile.
So Jack, I've now just understood my vacation plans for next year. I am going to go to Hull away. I am going to, whether Dom wants it or not, hang out with Dom all day in the press box. I'm going to have a menu served with burrito bowls at Hull City. Sounds like the absolute peach.
Yeah, I am just making notes as to where I should try to fly next season if I'm doing away press at some point. But in fact, on that, I will actually, next time I'm there, I will come and say hello, because I haven't managed to catch you yet. But next time I'm there, I'll come and say hello if I can catch you before you go on air, Dom.
Absolutely, Jack. Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. So I've just loaded up the menu now.
Oh, he's got a picture of the menu. See,
yeah.
Now that is bougie, Dom. You see, oh, I don't like to talk about the food, but then you did it, so it's okay. It's okay.
It's all content.
I said, well, I didn't put it online. I sent it to my girlfriend just to rub it in. So that's fine. But no, so it's so street food, barbacoa beef box, barbacoa jackfruit box, a selection of pies, all sorts of different stuff on there, and dessert as well. So look, hands down winners.
So Dom, we're just about to let you go. So just if you would, sum up the season for you from Dom Dietrich's perspective for Derby County before we go.
Ooh, relief. No, it's been a busy one. It's felt they don't always feel draining, but this one's felt pretty draining. Just there's been some tough watches. There's been some tough stories, which is, as I've said, is always good, but it takes a lot out of you. We've also had Burton Albion going through the same thing as well. So both clubs escaped. So happy with that. But look, I think relief is the main word to take away from this season. I think this is the big step down. I think where you look at it for Derby, the platform is there. It should all really be smooth sailing, but it never is. But yeah, they built themselves a platform this season. This is the biggest step since coming out of administration, I believe, staying up in the Championship. John Eustace in charge. And I'm looking forward to next season already.
Fair enough. Dom Dietrich from BBC Radio Derby. Dom, thanks so much for being with us today to recap what was a eventful season that ultimately ended in, like you say, relief.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers, guys. Always a pleasure.
Jack, thanks for being a part. It's been a pleasure working with you again this season. We'll continue with loads more season. There I go again with the Americanisms. We'll do some new season content coming in the next few days, as we'll have Jack's season review is out. We've got season ratings video coming out shortly, as well as loads of other pods and some nice bits that we've got in the works as well. So, Jack, thanks for being a part this season. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Yeah, I'll have various things I'm working on over the summer that I'll put out at the time. I can't say more at the moment, but there's various bits in the works with major tournaments over the summer, para football, women's Euros, so on. So, and obviously whatever happens with Derby. So it's still going to be busy. And yeah, been a pleasure. And obviously, yeah, we'll catch up soon. And hopefully, Dom, I will manage to catch you at Derby at some point soon.
Looking forward to it.
And for our audience, thanks so much for sticking with us this year. Really appreciate it. We have a survey if you want to take it to let us know what we're doing well or what we're not doing well so we can improve for next season. But until then, one last thing to say, and that is up the Rams.